Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Wow, it's probably been nearly a month since I've talked about the Meyer material. I've been so wrapped up in what's been going on with the election, with historical trends. I've had so many guests. Don't know how exactly this seemed to happen, but it did. It wasn't something that I necessarily planned, and I apologize to the people that like to listen to these archives and listen to the Meyer material. So anyway, even though it's rather late for me anyway tonight, about 9 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm going to try to pull myself together enough to talk about the Meyer information. So let's go back to a mild night in May in the year 1941 when Billy crawled out a lower window in his bedroom and sat down on a bench and looked up at a beautiful starry night, and he heard a voice in his head that said, "My life is made out of the love of creation." And he saw the visible stars and the visible starlight, but he knew that there was an invisible light that he called the love of creation. What does the term creation mean in the Meyer material? It's also called universal consciousness. This is the intelligence of our universe. It's not a heavenly Father. It isn't giving us commands and looking out for us in that way. It's a neutral, positive spirit that creates human spirit forms to help it with its own evolution. So our spirit form is a tiny fragment of the creation. The spirit form exists in the middle of your center brain there in an area called the superior colliculus. It comes into the body of a child 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg, and the spirit form brings with it something called the consciousness, and the consciousness is new for every reincarnation of the spirit form. So the consciousness includes your personality, your material consciousness, your subconsciousness, your unconsciousness. And with each new lifetime that the spirit form lives, it creates this new consciousness. This new consciousness is created in the spiritual realm by something called the overall consciousness block. So your spirit form reincarnates many, many times. Your consciousness is new, just like you get a new body each time you live a material life. We live about 40 to 60 million years reincarnating into physical bodies. So we spend a certain amount of time in the material realm. We spend about 100 years in the material realm, let's say. If we spent 100 years in the material realm and then we died, in an ideal situation, we would spend about 152 years in the spirit realm. And in the spirit realm, the overall consciousness block would dissolve the I, dissolve the ego, and it would take the things that you learned in this previous life, like love and honesty and wisdom and logic, things like that, and process them to what is called their essence, which is their highest level. And then your spirit form absorbs that information. So with each lifetime, the spirit form gets a little stronger, a little wiser. So this is the purpose of reincarnation. Now, something happens in the case that you have overpopulation. And when you have overpopulation, you don't get enough time in the spirit realm. And that has some bad side effects, like maleness isn't pronounced enough sometimes. When you come back in, you may be too dependent on parents. It's another example of spirit forms coming back in too soon. So this is the side effects, some of the side effects of overpopulation. It affects not only the physical realm, but the spiritual realm as well. So you come back in 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg. The spiritual consciousness comes back in. It brings with it a new personality. Now, your previous personality is absorbed into the planetary storage banks, the universal storage banks. So it's possible in the new lifetime to, if your thinking is at the right frequency, to pull information down from your previous personality. And also the information from that previous personality, your highest evolutionary level is stored in your subconscious mind. So in the new lifetime, you kind of start a little higher up the evolutionary level than you were in the previous lifetime. And this is how reincarnation helps with our spiritual growth from lifetime to lifetime. But the whole idea of overpopulation throwing off the reincarnational cycles is a big deal, because we need that time in the spiritual realm in order to process the information from the previous life, to completely process it and to completely form the new personality. And that's what's happening. Sometimes when people come back in too soon, the new personality isn't completely formed. It isn't completely programmed. You could think of the overall consciousness block in the spirit realm as programming your new personality, which will be different than your last personality. So this keeps us from falling into the rut of doing the same thing over and over and over again with each lifetime. So that's roughly, in 30,000-foot view, the way reincarnation works. Reincarnation is one of what's called the creational natural laws. Now, Billy, as I was describing there in 1941, was getting information from the storage banks, whether they were from the planetary storage banks or the universal storage banks, I don't know. But he said that many good memories penetrated me and showed me the way I had to go in my life. Thus, I suddenly knew what space and time signify concerning the evolution of human beings in all things. And that's when he recognized the light which the stars emitted, a light in the visible spectrum. But he sensed the radiating love of creation, because he knew at a very young age that everything which exists in the whole universe is a manifestation of the might and the infinite and true love of the mighty universal consciousness. So this universal consciousness is evolving. Our universal consciousness, our universe is 46 trillion years old. It started in something like a big bang, and it will expand for 155 trillion years, and then it will go into a contraction phase, and contract back to the initial size. It was like the size of a pea at one point, and it will go dormant and it will go into a rest phase. So the creation has its own kind of evolutionary process. We as human beings are created to help this evolutionary process, and our spirit form is a fragment of the universal consciousness. The spirit form cannot be harmed in any way. It's completely invulnerable. The spirit form has a central controlling factor called the Gemut, and the Gemut looks after the consciousness-based feelings and thoughts. The Gemut cannot be influenced by negative powers, negative thoughts. It can only be influenced by neutral positive thoughts. There's a term called Gemutsmenschen, which is a human being that radiates equanimity and doesn't get worked up easily, kind of related to the concept of the Gemut. The Gemut always exhibits this harmony, this neutral positive harmony. It supplies swinging waves, these periodically built up very powerful swinging waves that come from the electromagnetic realm of life energy. The Gemut makes these swinging waves available to the psyche, and that's your material consciousness. At later levels of evolution, we'll be able to use these swinging waves and do tremendous things like teleportation and levitation and all very, very amazing things in the future. Now, your spiritual consciousness operates only in this equalized, neutral, positive form. And we're told in the book called The Might of Thoughts that the negative and the positive must always be kept together and in a balance. And you should never get your thinking swayed to the negative or to the positive. The Gemut, this again controls the thoughts and the feelings of the spiritual consciousness. The spiritual consciousness, even though it isn't completely conscious, does have thoughts and feelings, but it has no direct connection to the material realm. It cannot be harmed by anything in the material realm. Your spiritual consciousness, again, is the part of you that survives between lifetimes. It just basically doesn't die. And it's important to understand that, because in some ways you can think of the spiritual consciousness as the real you. You know, we get a new material consciousness in each lifetime. The material consciousness has something called the psyche, and the psyche controls the thoughts and the feelings of the material consciousness. Now, in the biggest sense of the word, you can think of human existence as having three phases. The first phase is about 40 to 60 million years of reincarnations into a physical body. And there are 5 evolutionary steps with the Maya material outlines in this. We here on the Earth planet are about in stage 2. The Plejaren are in stage 5. Now, stage 6, we last about 56 million years in stage 6, which is what you might call the second phase of our existence. And in this phase, we're half spiritual and half physical. Now, the final phase of human life is completely spiritual. You don't get a physical body anymore, and we spend about 2.9 billion years in these spiritual planes before we merge back with creation. Now, don't ask me what we're doing in those spiritual planes. I don't know. It must be important. We're there for a very long time. Now, the spirit form is not able to think creatively. It's not really conscious until it merges with creation. Your spirit form can never enter into an animal or a plant. Maya material says there is no heaven or no hell. In order for the spirit form to evolve, again, as I said earlier, it creates this overall consciousness block. And the overall consciousness block in the spiritual realm is what creates your new personality for each incarnation. Your spirit form resides in the middle of your brain in an area called the superior colliculus, but it spreads its energies into the whole body. Again, the spirit form is completely invulnerable. It cannot be harmed by anything in the material realm. The reason that this universal consciousness creates human spirit forms is to help it evolve. So right now there are about 8.5 billion human beings on the earth. They each have a unique personality, a unique spirit form, a unique point of view, and they're playing a role in the evolution of the universal consciousness. There are, I think the Maya material says there are about 7 million solar systems in the Milky Way galaxy that support human life, and all these 7 million other solar systems, there are human spirit forms that are also evolving. So the creation creates material realm like other planets, other galaxies, other solar systems for 155.5 trillion years, and then it starts its contraction phase. And after this long contraction phase, it goes into a rest phase. Some interesting things that the Maya material says about the creation. It's said to be the being and the non-being of life. Everything is in an evolutive process. Everything evolves. The plants, the animals, human beings. Evolving our consciousness is the purpose of our life. And when we evolve our consciousness, we help the universal intelligence to evolve. Now, in the future, there's going to be, it may be the distant future, unfortunately, but in the future, humanity will exhibit more of a oneness. And this is a distinguishing form of creation. Creation has a oneness to it. And in the future, we'll have a global language. And when we have a global language, humanity will become more united, and there will be a kind of a oneness. Hopefully we strive to make German the world language, or a language like German. So hopefully that will happen. Emmanuel, one of the earlier incarnations of Edward Albert Meyer, talked about the oneness of creation. And he said that the body and the spirit are actually one. They're not two different things. So the teachings, the Meyer teachings, teach that there is a unity, a oneness to creation. There's no trinity, there's not a duality. Even the spirit form and the body are not a duality. And it kind of explains that the body comes from the spirit, which I think is fascinating. So, another thing to keep in mind is that we have a tremendous power this spirit form that we have is extremely powerful. We don't know how to use it yet at our current level of evolution. But the spirit form is very powerful. And Billy has a great article called The Source of the Oneness of the Universe, where he urges us to embrace the power within us. And this power that he's talking about is related to the swinging wave that I mentioned earlier. So it's also called an entrance into ourself. I'll give you an example. He says the creational natural power is within myself, and I use this, putting it into effect in my thinking and acting. This is a phrase which comes from one of Billy's books called Meditation from Clear Visibility. There are some other sayings in that book that are extremely helpful, if I can remember them. There's one that says, I always remain relaxed and thereby gain might over myself. I always remain relaxed and thereby gain might over myself. Everything is achievable for me, and I master all that I accomplish. Everything is achievable for me, and I master all that I accomplish. And as I was saying earlier, the body is a part of the spirit, but it's a different form and matter. And therefore, we should think of the body and the spirit as one. So the more we study this kind of material, the more we understand that the whole universe is a oneness which flows through all things. And Svath, Billy's first teacher, explained it this way. He said, there is a oneness and connectedness with all and everything. It is the result of the might and the immeasurable love of creation, which gives everything selflessly and demands no payment for it. So the spirit, this universal consciousness, it radiates love. How does it do that? By the splendor of nature, through the splendor of its creation. In one of Billy's books called The Goblet of Truth, he puts it this way. The paragraph is entitled, What the Truth Knows to Say. And it says, rivers, stones, plants, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a spirit form, is a life form with a spirit form. And these spirit forms are on a journey through time which involve many, many lifetimes. And that death is just the passage into the spiritual realm. So if you go into a forest or you pay attention to watch nature, watch the birds as they fly in a flock, and note that there is a swinging wave as these birds move as a unit because they're connected. You see, there is a consciousness which connects all things and all life, and there is a oneness through the universe. In Figu Bulletin number 38, it also talks about this flow of creation. The vibrations, energies, and their powers consist of a tiny fine material, respectively fluidal units of information, which individually and collectively constitute a oneness, which, like the electrical current going through wires, flow in an invisible form through the brain and through the body, and finally leave these to reach into the environment. So these fine fluidal energies that come from our spirit form go through our bodies and out into the world, into our clothes and into our furniture and into the trees, even near our home. So again, this is part of the oneness of the universe. Now I want to shift gears a little bit here and change topic, and I'm going to go back all the way to World War II. Because during the time of World War II, and actually even back into the ancient past, until, according to Meyer material, 1995, all the extraterrestrials that were on the Earth left the Earth, according to the Meyer material. There was a negative group of extraterrestrials called the Giza intelligences. They're also known as the B'Photh. And they had a connection with a society in Germany in World War II called the Thule Society, or the Thule Society. And the Thule Society had a man named Hermann Steinschneider, who they worked with to influence Hitler. Well, Hermann Steinschneider and the Thule Society were also in contact with these extraterrestrials called the Giza intelligences. And they succeeded in taking possession of Adolf Hitler's being, and they misused him for their dark and malicious purposes. Now, these extraterrestrial humans were a splinter group of the Pleiaren, and they resided far below the Giza Plateau in these old cubical constructions that were 73,000 years old. The Meyer material talks about the Great Pyramid and about it being incredibly ancient, 73,000 years old. So Hitler would have actually been a very positive leader for the world. He was actually being impulsed by the Pleiaren, by these same extraterrestrials that Billy was contacted by. And Hitler would have been a great man if it were not for these extraterrestrials called the B'Photh, also known as the Giza intelligences. I find that to be a very interesting little bit of information. Now, if we talk about the Giza intelligences, which is something I kind of go off on as kind of a tangent somewhat. So let's go ahead and do it. How did Billy first come in touch with these individuals? He saw them in their headquarters far below the Giza Plateau. He was taken there by his second extraterrestrial mentor. Billy met with a man named Svoth for 11 years, who was his mentor. After 11 years, his second extraterrestrial mentor, a woman named Asket from the Dow Universe, sent a craft to Switzerland, which landed on top of a hill where Billy was waiting, picked him up, and sent him all the way to Jordan. The craft became invisible and moved at an incredible high rate of speed. It landed in Jordan, in the Middle East. Billy got out, and he waited some time, and then out of the sky came this craft that looked like a falling star, and it was quite large, actually, when it got close enough. It was about a 300-meter disc, and when it landed, it just sat there for a half an hour, and Billy just had to wait. Out stepped this woman from the Dow Universe, a woman named Asket, who Billy had an instant deja vu experience, as if he all knew her somehow, probably from a previous life. In any sense, they both went aboard her ship, and she flew her ship somewhere near the Giza Plateau, landed the craft. She probably had a technology to cloak it, because shortly, when Billy and her left her ship, she made them, both of them, invisible. And they went far below this Giza Plateau in these long, dark hallways that were extremely dark. And eventually they got to this opening called this hallway, which was like the headquarters of these Giza intelligences. You have to keep in mind that Billy and Asket at this point are completely invisible, and they're trying to be silent. And Billy sees an ancient spacecraft, and he sees other spacecraft in there, and he sees these guards, and he sees on the floor these artifacts, which are perfect replicas of the cross, of the crown of thorns, and of a blood-encrusted nail. Now, Billy, who was, when he grew up, he was Protestant, a Christian. So these had a big impact on him, seeing these artifacts, and he just didn't know what to make of all this. So Askett got him out of there, and they went back up these dark hallways, and finally when they got to the top, Askett explained that there had been a negative group of extraterrestrial humans on the Earth since the times of Atlantis and Lemuria. And she explained to Billy that they had used religion to gain control of the people of the Earth, and that they can be traced back to about 11,500 years ago, when they had leaders on the Earth. One of these leaders was called Eris the 11th, and he, about 11,500 years ago, this is after the fall of Atlantis and Lemuria, he set himself up as a ruler and a leader over the people of the Earth. And the people who were on the Earth at that time were kind of a remnant of a very, very advanced civilization that had been on the Earth. The Maya material says at about 133,000 years ago, there was a very, very advanced civilization on our Earth. These were people that came to here from different star systems. And they settled, one group settled on Atlantis, which was this island continent between Africa and South America, near our equator. And they built these beautiful structures. And there was the leader of Atlantis was a man named Atlant. And he had a wife named Caryatide. And they built Greater Atlantis. Now, another man came here who built Mu. And Mu was in the area now we call the Gobi Desert. And there were two underground cities called Agartha Alpha and Agartha Beta. Now, these underground cities, they were connected by tunnels. And we have these two great cities, the cities of Atlantis, the cities of Lemuria. And these are the two biggest cities ever built on Earth. I believe the leader of Mu was a man named Muras. Anyway, these people, they lived for 2,000 years without any trouble between the two of them. However, a man came to the Earth from a star system hundreds of light years away. The star system is called Beta Centauri. And the man that came here was what they call a king of wisdom. And Ishwish, his name was Eris the Barbarian. And he landed in the northern part of the globe. And he took over a place called Hyperborea. And in the northern part of the Earth, this land called Hyperborea was a place of a constant summer. Somehow our climate was very different. And Hyperborea was a beautiful place, a place where there were palm trees and all kind of fruit-bearing trees. And it was just warm and nice, and it was beautiful all the time. Now, Eris, after he took over Hyperborea, he sent his son, Aryan, to take over India and Pakistan. So this is the beginnings of the trouble between Atlantis and Lemuria. And eventually this will get us to our Giza intelligences. So one of the important aspects of the Maya material are these histories, which help us, give us a better understanding of our Earth and a better understanding of what has gone on and what will go on the Earth. Now, Eris, he had 200 leaders and sub-leaders. And one of his leaders was a great scientist named Semyasa. And Semyasa mated with an Earth woman. And this Earth woman had an offspring called Adam. So the Maya, that's Maya materials take on Adam. Now Semyasa is mentioned in Contact 191 in reference to problems that occurred on Earth in the ancient past. Semyasa, there were other things that went on. There were genetic engineering that went on. There were these giants that were kind of created. In any case, all of this craziness caused problems between Atlantis and Lemuria. And for one reason or another, Atlantis decided to attack the city of Mu. They had a tremendous fleet of ships. They had like 4.83 million people in their army. They had 123,000 one-man beam ships. They had tremendous armament. They went to Mu and they melted the city of Mu to the ground. Now it's interesting. I'm going to mention just a second one website that I have, which is called exopolitics.ohio.us, and you can go there and you can see some of these notes. If you look up at the various tab, there is a series of other links, and one of those is Contact 59. And Contact 59 is the Maya material, what the Maya material has to say in a little more depth about Atlantis and Lemuria, about the rise of Atlantis and Lemuria and the fall. Again, these are two great cities. They were about 133,000 years ago. And what I was just describing was Eris and how he conquered Hyperborea. His son went into India and Pakistan, and they attacked this northern part of the earth, which was very beautiful and very warm. So Eris the barbarian stirred up the great war that occurred between Atlantis and Lemuria. And Atlantis's fleet of beam ships melted the city of Mu to the ground. Well, there were a couple of scientists from Mu that escaped, and they went to our asteroid belt, and they found, well, let me read this to you. It's very interesting. Namely, the scientists of Mu had discovered powers which made it possible for them to convert whole small planets into all-destroying cosmic bombs, which they tore out of their millions of years old courses and steered them with great positions toward an exactly defined aim point on another planet. So they went to our asteroid belt and they found a fragment of another planet in our solar system named Malona. And they took this planetoid and they, well, let me read here. It says, then the self-rotation of the planetoid was braked and stopped while they built a propulsion drive on the side away from the Earth, a drive of gigantic size, with the goal of accelerating the little planet, and they were aiming it at Atlantis. And they brought it, and they did just that. So this great planetoid came in like a falling star. It peeled small at first, and then it became very close, gigantic in size. And the people looking at it were fascinated and paralyzed. Their eyes opened wide in horror. The humans stared at this monster, which so suddenly and noiselessly rushed near, yet then suddenly gave out an unbearable howling sound when it entered into the first layers of the atmosphere of the Earth and was exposed to the friction. And then 2 seconds later, the planetoid glowed like a supernova, and it says it generated a heat of more than 34,000 degrees. And just the heat from this thing going through the atmosphere burnt whole regions of land away. And eventually it exploded at about 172 kilometers high. It broke into thousands of smaller meteorites, which landed on the Earth like small atomic bombs in different places. And they destroyed everything in their way. The whole Earth shook in this huge explosion. Thunder rolled over the whole globe, and the Earth was badly shaken. Now, there were 2 large parts of this planetoid that crashed like 2 titanic fists into the Atlantic Ocean and slammed into the hard crust on the bottom of the sea. And the Earth was, at this point, in a horrific catastrophe. And the Maya information says here, it seemed like the Earth would die because the impact power of the remnant pieces was greater than 32,000 hydrogen bombs. Deep down in the ocean, the crust was torn and it bubbled up. Magma bubbled up, hot glowing magma. And the waters of the sea began to bubble and to boil, and masses of waters rushed up into the atmosphere, some 90,000 feet high. You can imagine this sight. Then the raging sea was thrown up in a gigantic tidal wave, which with great speed shot along at a height of over 2,000 meters, and it just submerged whole countries underwater. It destroyed everything it touched. It completely wiped out the island kingdom of Atlantis. It disappeared below the raging waters of the Atlantic without leaving even one creature around. The capital of Atlantis was in the form of a beam ship, and it was rent into several pieces, and it sank underground. Now, this occurred about 11,500 years ago. And about 700 years later or so, these Giza intelligences came back. And the first member of the Giza intelligences was Eris the 11th, and he was one of the descendants of Eris the 11th, and he was from Beta Centauri. Now, Beta Centauri is about 350 light years away. It has 3 components, Beta Centauri A1, A2, and B. These are both giant stars that have exhausted the hydrogen at their core. It's interesting that Beta Centauri, this Beta Centauri that we're talking about, was in a different space-time configuration. In any case, let me talk a little more about these Giza intelligences. These were the people, the extraterrestrials, which came back to the nearly destroyed Earth, and they took advantage of the people that were left, because this was many generations later, at least 700 years later. And The people that were left were living in very primitive state. They didn't remember their history. They had lost all their technology. So they were very vulnerable to these extraterrestrials who posed as gods. And it started with a man named Eris the 11th, who was murdered by his son Jehovah. Jehovah ruled the earth until about 3,660 years ago. And these extraterrestrials let themselves be called the creator, and they created a religion. Jehovah was murdered by his son Jehav some 340 years into his father's reign. Jehav also became megalomaniacal. He called himself the creator. He demanded to be worshipped. And eventually, Erisame murdered his father, Jehav. And Erisame was the first one of these leaders that went underground. He had something like 72,000 followers. They went far underground at these old cubicle constructions below the Giza Plateau, which had not been inhabited for some 70,000 years. And these people established themselves as the Giza intelligences. And Erisame ruled, and this was about 3000 BC. Who were the Giza intelligences? They, for thousands of years, deceived Earth humankind with religious miracles and visions of every kind. They worked to create religious delusion on the earth. They had been the gods of ancient times. They had, as I had said earlier, they had influenced Hitler during the Thule time. Their goal was not to destroy the human race, but to rule the human race. And they used religion. So I was talking about the lineage of the Giza intelligences. Erisame was eventually thrown out of power by a man named Hen, who was called Jehovah. Meyer material says this was the God mentioned in the Old Testament. This Jehovah ruled in something like 2080 BC. He was forced out of power by Kamagal, and Kamagal the first took leadership of the Giza intelligences. Kamagal the second ruled in the Giza intelligences until about 1976. And eventually the Giza intelligences were pushed off the earth. They had attacked Billy's building there, called the Semyasu Silver Star Center, in May of 1978. The Plejaren extraterrestrials installed a shield over the Semyasu Silver Star Center. Eventually, these Giza intelligences were captured, arrested, deported. They were stripped of all their technology except the most basic survival equipment, and they were permanently incarcerated on a remote planet in the Plejaren Federation. Now, we still are under the telenotic impulses of these Giza intelligences, and we will be for about another 200 or 300 years. So that is a quick overview of Atlantis and Lemuria, the Giza intelligences, and so this is what Billy saw. He saw the headquarters of the Giza intelligences. He saw that, I'm thinking, right around the middle 1950s. And after he saw the Giza intelligences headquarters, he decided that he would study the religions of the world. He left Switzerland and he went to the Middle East, and he ended up in the Ashoka Ashram. And he was still having his contacts with Asket. He met Phobal Chang, who eventually became a UN diplomat. Phobal Chang also saw Asket and saw her ships. And many of the people working at the ashram saw ships as well. Eventually, Billy's contacts with Ascot ended after about another 11 years, a total of 11 years of contacts with Ascot, 11 years of contacts with Svoth. Billy then met his wife, and they went to Switzerland. They had children. He had 11 years of a normal life, and eventually he started his contacts again. In this time, he started to have contacts with a woman named Semyase. This was in the middle 1970s. Semyase was, at this time, about 344 years old. She was about 5.5 feet tall. She was a slender, pretty woman. She would land her beamship there in near Schmidruti, Hinter Schmidruti, land the beamship in a field, step out, walk over to Billy, who would be waiting by a tree with his moped, and they would sit down and have these very, very interesting conversations. And then she would have to leave. Billy would go back home, sit at his computer, and Semyase's ship, the computer in Semyase's ship, would send the contact back in a symbolic form, perfectly as it happened, the conversation. And Billy would write the contact report down as quickly as he possibly could type. And that's the way the contact reports got started. Billy has written over 2,000 contact reports. Now, unfortunately, on December 15th of 1977, Semyase suffered a life-threatening accident in the Semyase Silver Star Center and had to be taken to her home planet of Era immediately. One of the other people visiting the center, one of the FIGU, Billy's organization, accidentally walked into the room, startled Ascot, who fell and hit her head, had a very serious brain injury, managed to be teleported back to her ship, and eventually she was rescued by the other Plejaren, and she recovered for a while, but in 1984, February 3rd, Billy had the last contact with Semyase. She suffered a cerebral collapse in November of 1984. She had to be transported quickly again to the Dow universe, and she was healed with the help of Ascot and another extraterrestrial group called the Sonar, the SONAER, who are ETs from the Dow universe, very unusual people that do not require any ships to travel through space and time. So the complete regeneration of Semyase's brain and psi powers and abilities will take about 70 years to completely heal. So Billy's no longer having contacts with Semyase anymore. He has contacts today with two Plejaren men named Quetzal and Ptah, and all of the contacts today are typically with these two individuals. Anyway, I think I'll end it there this evening. I hope you enjoyed the show. It's been a while since I talked about the Meyer material, and it's good to do so. Have a great day if I don't chat with you tomorrow, and we'll see you soon. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Good evening.